Look at the photograph. London, December 1980. A bride leaves the guard's chapel, veil up. Photographers at the car door. For 6 months, the papers had her tipped as the next Princess of Wales. The groom is not Prince Charles. He is 9 weeks from proposing to a 19-year-old. That summer, at 2 balls, he reportedly danced most of both evenings with another man's wife. The line Anna Wallace supposedly threw at him survives in 3 different versions, in 3 different books, and never in her own voice. She never gave one. That silence is where the real story starts. The groom that day was the Honourable John Fermor Hesketh, younger brother of Lord Hesketh. The date is not in dispute and never has been. The 2nd of December 1980, recorded in the peerage volumes alongside her baptism and her later remarriage, and photographed by the same agencies that had spent the previous summer chasing her through Gloucestershire. Charles proposed to Lady Diana Spencer on the 6th of February 1981. He married her on the 29th of July. So the order of events is this. She got out, then she got married, then he got engaged. That is not how the story is usually told. The version that survives has her as a sort of weather event. Whiplash Wallace, the hot-tempered heiress who lost her nerve on a dance floor, shouted at the future king and evaporated. It's a good anecdote. It's been reprinted for 45 years. It's also, when you actually chase it back to its origins, a sentence attributed to a woman by people who were not standing next to her, published by writers she never spoke to, about an evening she has never once described, which brings us to the word in the title, cruel. I want to be careful here, because the temptation is to make this a story about one man behaving badly, and the evidence for that is thinner than the internet pretends. What the evidence actually supports is worse and stranger. There was a system operating around the Prince of Wales at the end of the 1970s, a courtship machine involving the press, the court, his friends, his family, and the betting shops. And that system had already destroyed several women before Anna Wallace ever appeared in it. She was the one who read the manual, saw exactly what was coming, and refused to sign. To understand why she refused, you have to understand what the machine had been doing for 4 years. In 1975, in an interview with Woman's Own, Charles said he thought around 30 was a good age for a man to marry. He was 27. It was an offhand line about wanting to have lived a bit first. The British press treated it as a deadline. He turned 30 in November 1978, and nothing happened. And the coverage curdled from playful to impatient to openly hostile. Then, in August 1979, Lord Mountbatten, his great-uncle, his mentor, the man who had been quietly steering him toward a suitable match for years, was murdered by the IRA in County Sligo. Charles was 31, grieving, publicly single, and by every credible account under increasing pressure from his father to settle the succession question. That is the atmosphere. Now here is what the machine did to the women who walked into it. Davina Sheffield, 1976. She was a serious contender by the standards of the day, from a good family, and the newspapers liked her. Then a former boyfriend gave an account of having lived with her. The reporting ran on the front pages. That was the end of it. Not because Charles was recorded objecting, there is no such record, but because the press had established in public that she had a past, and a past was disqualifying. She left the country for a while. Lady Sarah Spencer, 1977 into 1978, Diana's older sister, and for a season the favourite. She made the other unforgivable mistake. She talked. She told journalists on the record that she wasn't in love with him and wouldn't marry a man she didn't love, whether he was a dustman or the King of England. It reads now as admirable. At the time, it was fatal. The invitation stopped. She was the one, incidentally, who later introduced him to her teenage sister. Jane Ward, 1979. She worked at the Guards Polo Club at Windsor. She was seen with him a handful of times, the papers found her, and within weeks she had left the job. She was divorced. She was, in the vocabulary of the coverage, unsuitable. 3 women, 3 exits, 3 different alleged offences, a lover, an interview, a divorce. The rule wasn't complicated. Be young enough to have done nothing and quiet enough to say nothing. Anna Wallace was 24 when she entered the frame, and she had done things, and she talked. She was born in 1955. The peerage records her baptism on the 19th of November that year, the daughter of Hamish Edward Wallace, a landowner, and Ivory Sylvia painter. This matters more than it sounds. She came from the part of British society that owns fields rather than flats, the hunting and shooting counties where the Prince of Wales spent most of his private weekends. She rode hard. She was known for it. She was, in the language the papers reached for immediately, fearless in the saddle. And that is where the nickname started before it got attached to her temperament. Understand what she had that the eventual bride did not. She had her own money, or at least her own family's. She had land. She had a social position that did not depend on him, a circle that overlapped his but wasn't produced by it. She was 24, not 19. She had been in relationships and she had not hidden them. Every single one of those things was an asset in any normal life and a liability in this one. Diana Spencer, when her turn came, was 19 years old, living in a flat with school friends, working with small children, and had almost nothing on the record. That was not an accident of temperament. By 1980, it had become a job requirement. The record of how Charles and Anna actually met is vague, and I'd rather say so than invent it. Several accounts place it in the hunting field or through the overlapping house party circuit of Gloucestershire and the home counties. The specifics differ depending on which biographer you read, and none of them cite a witness. What is documented is the winter. They were together on hunting weekends through the early months of 1980, and on the 31st of January that year, the photographers got what they wanted. Anna Wallace out with the Cheshire, with the Prince of Wales in the frame. From that point, she stopped being a private person. The papers assigned staff to her. The bookmakers quoted odds. Her name appeared in the diary columns with the particular tone the British press uses when it has decided a woman is about to become national property, half flattery, half audit. Every photograph of her that survives from 1980 was taken by a professional who was being paid to establish whether she was going to be queen. Nobody asked her. That was not how it worked. The courtship was being conducted in public by third parties, on a timetable set by a 9-year-old magazine interview and a dead great-uncle's wishes, and the woman at the centre of it was expected to say nothing at all while it happened. She was also, though she may not have grasped the full architecture of it at first, being courted inside a social world that already had a permanent occupant. Camilla Parker Bowles, then in her early 30s, married since 1973 to Andrew Parker Bowles, a cavalry officer and a friend of Charles, was not a hidden figure on the edge of this story. She was structural. The Parker Bowleses lived in Wiltshire, moved through the same Gloucestershire houses, attended the same polo, hunted with the same people. Charles was one of the godparents to their eldest son. When you were invited to a country weekend in that circuit, you were not being invited to a place where Camilla might turn up. You were being invited to her circuit and to hosts who had known her for a decade. So Anna Wallace spent the first half of 1980 being photographed as the presumptive future Princess of Wales while attending, again and again, events organised by people for whom another woman was the fixed point. Penny Junor, who has written more about Camilla than anyone and who is generally sympathetic to both of them, is the source most people quote for what happened next. Her account is short, and it's devastating in its ordinariness. 2 balls, one after the other, and at both of them Charles spent most of the evening dancing with Camilla. Hold that for a moment, because before we get to those 2 nights, something else was happening to Anna Wallace in the spring of 1980, and it was being done by people who had never met her. They were giving her names. Whiplash Wallace is the one that stuck, and it stuck because it did 2 jobs at once. On the surface, it was about riding, a woman who went at fences the way men were supposed to. Underneath, once the diary columns got hold of it, it meant something else entirely. It meant difficult. It meant she'd take a strip off you. It meant, in the coded vocabulary of the British social press, that she was not biddable, and biddable was the entire specification. The second nickname is uglier, and I want to flag exactly what kind of evidence it rests on, because it gets repeated as fact, and it shouldn't be. According to a Daily Mail account that has been recycled for decades, once it emerged that Anna had been involved with a couple of other men before Charles, Princess Anne is said to have dubbed them the Wallace Collection. It's a pun on the London Museum. It's the sort of line that gets remembered because it's clever. Here is the problem. There is no contemporary source for it. No dated document, no named witness, nothing published at the time. It surfaces later in retellings, attributed to a member of the royal family who has never confirmed it and was never going to be asked. I don't know that Princess Anne said it. Neither does anyone else writing about it, and most of them don't tell you that. But notice what the anecdote does, regardless of whether it's true. Whether Anne said it, or a courtier said it, or a journalist made it up in a wine bar in 1981, somebody wanted the story to exist. Somebody wanted it on the record that this woman's romantic history had been counted, catalogued, and laughed at inside the palace. That is the machine doing its work, the same work it had done to Davina Sheffield 4 years earlier with the same weapon. Her adulthood was the disqualifier. That's the whole mechanism. A 24-year-old woman who had lived a normal 24 years was, by the operating rules of 1980, damaged goods for the specific role of Princess of Wales, and everybody in that world understood it. Charles himself had said in that 1975 interview that he would not consider divorce, which made the choice of wife a permanent, one-shot decision under maximum scrutiny. Now, the proposal. You will read everywhere that Charles proposed to Anna Wallace twice, and she turned him down both times. I've seen it in a dozen places. Almost all of them trace back to a single strand of Daily Mail reporting, phrased carefully. According to some of Anna's friends, Charles actually did propose. That is not nothing. Friends can be right, but it is also not a letter, a diary, a dated document, or a named person on the record, and the sourcing has never improved in 45 years. It has just been repeated until the qualification fell off. And here's the detail that should make you sit up. In 1994, Jonathan Dimbleby published the authorised biography of the Prince of Wales, written with Charles's cooperation and with access to his journals and private correspondence, the closest thing that exists to an official account of his inner life. In that book, Charles's proposal to Amanda Knatchbull, Mountbatten's granddaughter, and her refusal are given real weight. It's treated as a genuine crossroads. Anna Wallace is essentially not there. Think about what that means. The authorised record, the version constructed with the subject's own participation from his own papers, did not consider the woman the entire British press had spent 1980 calling his likely bride to be a significant chapter in his life. Maybe that's an accurate reflection of how he experienced it. Maybe it's an editorial decision. Either way, the effect is the same. The only account of that year with archival authority behind it declined to include her, which left the field permanently open to the tabloids and the anecdote collectors. She has no archive. He has one. That asymmetry decides everything that follows. Which brings us to the summer. The Queen Mother turned 80 in 1980, and the celebrations ran for weeks. A ball was held at Windsor Castle in June in her honour. and Anna Wallace was there as Charles's guest. This was, by the standards of that world, an announcement. You do not bring a woman to a family ball at Windsor Castle casually. Every guest in that room could read it. By the accounts that survive, he then spent most of the evening dancing with Camilla Parker Bowles. The second ball came weeks later, in Gloucestershire, at Stowell Park, the estate of Lord Vestey, the polo world's great host, a man who would later serve as Master of the Horse to the Queen for nearly 20 years. A polo ball at Stowell Park was the beating heart of that particular social circuit. Charles's friends, Charles's sport, Charles's county. By the accounts that survive, it happened again. That's Juna's version. 2 successive balls, most of both evenings, the same partner. And then, in every telling, the line. Except the line changes. Juna gives it as, "No one treats me like that, not even you." The author Jessica Jane renders it as, "Don't you ever, ever ignore me like that again." Sarah Bradford's version runs closer to, "I have never been so badly treated in my life." Other retellings splice them together into a single speech, complete with a declaration that he could finish the evening without her. 3 books, 3 sentences. One woman who has never confirmed a word of any of them. That distinction matters, and not for the reason you'd expect. I'm not telling you the confrontation didn't happen, something clearly did, and the relationship ended immediately afterward, which is corroboration of a sort. I'm telling you that what survives of Anna Wallace's own voice, the single most famous thing she's supposed to have said, the sentence that gets used as the proof of her fiery temperament, exists only as a reconstruction by writers working from other people's memories, years and sometimes decades later. Her reputation was built out of paraphrase, and look at what the paraphrase does to her. In every version, the emphasis lands on her anger. She's the one making a scene. The framing is that she lost control, which is exactly what the nickname had already primed everyone to expect. The heiress with the temper going off at a party. Strip the adjectives away and describe the underlying event neutrally. A woman is taken by her partner to 2 formal events in the same summer, in front of the people whose opinion governs her entire social world, and at both of them he spends the evening with someone else. On the second occasion, she leaves. Then she ends the relationship and never discusses it again. That's not a tantrum. That's a decision, made twice, once about the evening, once about the man. There is one more thing worth saying about that summer, and it's the part that reframes everything. Charles did not stop seeing Camilla when Anna appeared, and he did not stop when Anna left. The relationship with Camilla ran continuously through the marriage market of the late 70s and into the marriage itself. That is now a matter of public record, admitted by Charles himself on television in 1994 and confirmed by the recorded telephone conversation published in 1993. Whatever any of these women were being auditioned for, the emotional centre of his life was not the vacancy, which means the audition was never really for the position it advertised. It was for a role beside a man whose attachments were already settled, in a household that required a public partner, on a timetable set by his father and the newspapers. Anna Wallace worked that out in the summer of 1980. Diana Spencer, who was 19, would take considerably longer and would find out under conditions Anna never had to survive. So the relationship ends somewhere in July, and here is where the standard story stops. She swept out of the party and out of his life, as the Mail put it, a nice exit line for a woman who then, in the telling, simply ceases to exist. Except she didn't cease to exist. She got extremely busy. On the 2nd of December, 1980, 4 or 5 months after the Stowell Park ball, depending on exactly when that summer things ended, Anna Wallace married the Honourable John Fermor Hesketh at the Guards Chapel, Wellington Barracks, in the middle of London. Not quietly, not abroad, not in a Scottish parish church at the far end of her father's land, where nobody would have found her. The Guards' Chapel, central London. The photographers there in force, agency captions filed, images that survive today in the Getty and Alamy libraries and are still licensed as news pictures 45 years later. One caption identifies her simply as the daughter of the wealthy landowner Hamish Wallace, leaving the chapel after her wedding. Another set, shot earlier that autumn, shows her with her fiancé and files her under the only description that would sell: former girlfriend of Prince Charles. She was 25 years old and she had just used the machine. Every instrument that had been pointed at her since January, the photographers, the diary columns, the agencies, the appetite, she walked directly into, on a date of her choosing, wearing a wedding dress, next to a man who was not him. I want to be careful not to oversell this, because I can't tell you what was in her head that day, and neither can anyone else. There is no letter, there is no interview. It is entirely possible that she was simply in love with John Fermor Hesketh, and the timing meant nothing at all. But the timing is a fact, and facts have consequences regardless of intention. On the 2nd of December 1980, the woman the British press had spent 11 months auditioning for the throne appeared in front of those same cameras as somebody's wife. 9 weeks later, on the 6th of February 1981, Charles proposed to Diana Spencer. He was still looking. She was already gone. Read the sequence in that order and the whole shape of the anecdote inverts. The version everyone repeats has her as the loser of an encounter, the girlfriend who blew it, who lost her temper, who was too much and too old and too experienced, and who therefore lost the prince. The documented calendar says the opposite. She left in July. She was married by December. He was engaged in February and married in July of the following year, to a 19-year-old he had met perhaps a dozen times, under pressure that had by then become close to unbearable. Ask which of those two people had more control over their own life in 1981, and the answer isn't close. Now, the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that actually makes this story worth telling, what she did afterward, nothing. She never gave an interview, not in 1981, when the engagement was announced and every newspaper in Britain would have paid serious money for the first-person account of the woman who walked out on him. Not in 1992, when Andrew Morton's book detonated the marriage and the market for royal testimony went white-hot. Not in 1993, after the recorded phone call. Not in 1994, when Charles admitted the affair on television. Not in 1997. Not in 2005, when he married Camilla. Not in 2022, when he became king. 45 years of the single most lucrative running story in British publishing, and she has never once said what happened at Stowell Park. Compare that with everyone else in this story. Diana had Morton, and then the Panorama interview, and shaped her own version so effectively that it still governs public memory. Charles had Dimbleby, an authorised biography and a 2.5-hour television documentary, and put his side on the record with the full apparatus of the household behind it. Camilla eventually had the sympathetic biographers and the slow institutional rehabilitation that ended in a coronation. Anna Wallace had nothing and gave nothing. Her life after 1980 is recorded in the places where lives are recorded when nobody is selling them: peerage volumes and register entries. The marriage to Fermor Hesketh ended in divorce before 1986. She married again on the 19th of July, 1991, to Thomas Oates. A daughter, Ophelia Rose, was born in December 1992. That is the extent of the public record of the next 30 years, and it is the extent of it because she wanted it that way. Now here is the reversal, and it is not a comfortable one. The silence protected her. It also cost her the story. Because she never spoke, other people filled the space, and the version they built is the one that survives. She is Whiplash Wallace. She is the temper. She is the woman who made a scene at a ball. The one sentence anybody can quote from her is a sentence assembled from 3 contradictory second-hand reconstructions. and it is used, almost universally, as evidence of the very quality that supposedly made her unsuitable in the first place. That's the cruelty, not a man behaving badly at a party. That's just a bad evening, and bad evenings are survivable. The cruelty is a system in which a woman's entire recorded existence is produced by people who are not there, in which her documented life amounts to 4 dates in a genealogical reference book, and in which her one act of self-defense has been permanently rewritten as a loss of composure. And the system did not stop with her. That is the part that should genuinely bother you. Everything the machine used against Anna Wallace in 1980, the past, the age, the independence, the temper, it used to select against her, and what it selected for instead was a 19-year-old with no history, no money of her own, no established social position, and no experience of the press. The specification produced Diana Spencer. Then the same machine spent the next 16 years dismantling her in public until she died being chased through Paris by photographers whose trade had been built, in part, on precisely this kind of hunt. Anna Wallace saw the machine from inside it for 11 months and got out. Nobody has ever given her credit for that, because giving her credit would require accepting that there was something worth escaping, and the story the press preferred was that she had failed to qualify. So look at the photograph again. December 1980, the Guards' Chapel, Wellington Barracks. The bride leaving in the veil, the car door open, the men with cameras who had been following her since a hunting field in Cheshire in January. First reading, Consolation Prize, the one who didn't make it, marrying a Hesketh instead, 6 months after she blew her chance. That's how those pictures were captioned at the time, and that's roughly how they've been used ever since. The girl who nearly became queen, filed under also ran. Second reading, once you have the dates in front of you, it is the only document Anna Wallace ever authored. She left no letters. She sat for no interviews. She wrote no book. She did not authorize a biographer or brief a friendly columnist or place a single anonymous quote. Everything anyone claims to know about what she thought comes second-hand, from writers working decades later, in wordings that don't match each other. Everything except this: a date, a church in central London, a press pack she could have avoided entirely and did not, a photograph she chose to be in. She never wrote a word about the Prince of Wales. She just made sure that when he finally did propose to someone, the woman the papers had spent a year measuring for the job had already been married for 9 weeks, and had the pictures to prove it.